The air in the boardroom was thick enough to slice with a knife. Not a single breath, not a rustle of fabric, just the silent, suffocating weight of disbelief as every executive at Sterling and Graves Manhattan's crown jewel of architecture firms stared at the woman in the navy blue janitor's uniform. Her name was Maria Gutierrez, though no one in that room had ever bothered to learn it. For 5 years, she'd moved through the office like a ghost, polishing glass, emptying trash bins, and scrubbing coffee stains from marble floors. Now, she stood with her chin lifted, her rubber-gloved hand still raised, while the new CEO, Daniel Carter, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness was etched into every headline, held her unsigned blueprint like it was a sacred text. Daniel had stormed into the 34th floor suite that morning like a hurricane in a tailored suit. Former Special Forces, a billionaire by 35, he'd built an empire on the bones of mediocrity. The rumor mill had spun wild. He'd once fired an entire team via text message during a black-tie gala. When he slapped the design onto the conference table, a revolutionary eco-tower fusing brutalist steel with living greenery, the room had collectively held its breath. "This," he'd said, voice like gravel, "is the future. So why the hell does it smell like corporate mothballs in here?" The executives had scrambled like rats in a maze. The senior VP, a man who'd once told Maria to stick to the mop, began sweating through his $3,000 suit. The head of HR, who'd never acknowledged Maria beyond a curt nod, suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Then, from the corner, came the soft scrape of a broom against tile. Maria stepped forward, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. "I drew it," she said, her accent curling around the words like smoke. Late nights, after the last latte was dumped in the sink, the silence that followed was louder than any tantrum Daniel could have thrown. He studied her, the frayed hem of her uniform, the calluses on her fingers, then did something no one expected. He laughed. Not the cold, sharp sound they'd braced for, but something warmer, almost admiring. "Of course it was you," he said, shaking his head. "The only person in this building who actually touches the damn walls." Then came the twist. Maria didn't just sketch the design. She'd secretly coded an AI model to test its carbon footprint, using the office's discarded coffee cups as makeshift wind tunnels. When Daniel demanded proof, she pulled a thumb drive from her pocket, the same one that had been mistaken for a locker key for years. As the screens lit up with simulations, the room's collective ego withered like a plant in the desert. By noon, Maria had a corner office. By 3, the HR director was offering her a company car. But the real victory came at 5 p.m. when Daniel handed her a Sharpie and pointed to the blueprint. "Sign it," he said, "and make it big enough for every idiot in this room to remember who built the future." As Maria's name bloomed across the page in bold, looping letters, the janitor's closet became the most popular room in the building. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know her ideas, her story, even her favorite brand of disinfectant. Funny how respect arrives when you stop asking for it and start demanding it with a blueprint and a spine of steel. Joyce Miller's fingers traced the edge of the blueprint, her calloused hands a stark contrast to the polished glass table. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the HVAC system until Sandra, the HR director, cleared her throat with a sound like a door creaking shut. "MIT, that's impressive. But let's be realistic. You've been cleaning bathrooms for 5 years. Do you honestly expect us to believe you're still current in this field?" Joyce didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her uniform and pulled out a worn leather notebook. The pages were filled with sketches, not just buildings, but entire cityscapes, energy grids, even a desalination plant designed to float off the coast of Miami. "I never stopped," she said, flipping to a page where a tower twisted like a double helix, its facade covered in photovoltaic vines. "I just stopped showing anyone." Damon's eyes darkened as he studied the notebook. Then without warning, he slammed his palm on the table, making half the room jump. "You've been wasting this woman's talent on Windex and toilet brushes." His voice was low, dangerous. The young analyst who'd spoken earlier shrank in his seat. "Sir, we didn't." "Shut it," Damon snapped. He turned back to Joyce. "Tell me about the solar glass. How'd you solve the thermal expansion issue?" For the first time, Joyce smiled just a flicker, like a light switching on in a distant window. "I didn't. I eliminated it." She tapped a corner of her design. "The panels aren't mounted, they're grown. Bioengineered silica layers that adapt to temperature shifts. Like coral, but for skyscrapers." The room erupted. The CFO started scribbling numbers on a napkin. The head of sustainability looked like she might faint. But Sandra wasn't done. "This is all very touching, but let's not pretend credentials don't matter. There are liability issues, insurance." Joyce cut her off. "I'm licensed in 3 states, including New York." She reached into her other pocket and slid a folded document across the table. It was her architect's license renewed every year, even while she'd been scrubbing their floors. Damon let out a bark of laughter. "Jesus Christ, you people didn't even background check the woman who had keys to your offices." Then came the twist. Joyce stood pushing the chair back with deliberate calm. "But I don't want a job here." The room froze. "Not like this. Not because I had to beg for it." She looked at Damon. "I'll consult on this project, on my terms. And you'll pay me what I'm worth, not what you think a janitor deserves." A vein throbbed in Sandra's temple. "That's outrageous. You can't just—" Damon silenced her with a look. "Done." He extended his hand. Joyce shook it, her grip firm, her gloves left, crumpled on the table like shed skin. As she walked out, the receptionist, a woman who'd ignored Joyce for years, suddenly blurted, "Your daughter would be proud." Joyce paused at the elevator, her back still straight, her voice steady. "She is." The doors closed. And for the first time in half a decade, Joyce Miller didn't head for the supply closet. She walked straight out the front door into a city that had just gotten a little brighter. The air in the room turned electric as Damon stepped closer to Joyce, his polished Oxfords clicking against the marble like a ticking clock. "You left this on my desk deliberately," he said, not as a question, but as an acknowledgement of a battle she'd already won. The folder had been pristine, no fingerprints, no coffee stains, just pure, undeniable genius laid bare on paper. Then came the twist no one saw coming. From the back of the room, a junior architect, a fresh-faced kid who'd once tossed his empty latte cup toward Joyce's trash bin and missed, suddenly stood up. "I can vouch for her," he said, his voice shaking but clear. 3 months ago, I saw her fixing the renderings for the Hudson Yards project after hours, the ones I messed up. He swallowed hard. "I never said anything because I was embarrassed. But the client loved them." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The Hudson Yards deal had saved the firm from a quarterly disaster. Damon's gaze never left Joyce. "You saved their asses and let them take the credit," she shrugged. "I didn't need a thank you. I needed to know if my work could still stand on its own." The silence that followed was thicker than the tension before a storm. Then, with a suddenness that made the HR director flinch, Damon grabbed the nearest chair and dragged it to the center of the room. The screech of metal against floor echoed like a gunshot. "Sit," he told Joyce. "Right here, where everyone can see you." As she sat, the dynamics of the room shifted palpably. The executives who'd spent years stepping over her now had to look up to meet her eyes. Then Damon dropped the bomb. Effective immediately, Joyce leads the innovation division. And since half of you clearly can't tell talent from trash, she'll also oversee the next round of promotions. Sandra shot up from her seat. "You can't just—" "I can—" Damon interrupted, his voice slicing through hers. "Because unlike you, I don't confuse job titles with worth." He turned to Joyce. "One condition: you get to choose your team, even if that means cleaning house." Joyce leaned back, surveying the room. The flushed faces, the clenched jaws, the junior staff trying to hide their grins. For the first time in years, she felt the old fire ignite in her chest. "I'll need a new office," she said calmly. "The one with the north-facing windows. And Sandra." She paused, letting the woman squirm. "You'll handle the paperwork." The gasp was audible. Sandra's face turned the color of spoiled milk. But the real victory came an hour later, when Joyce walked into her new office, her name on the door, her designs on the walls, and found a single freshly brewed cup of coffee waiting on the desk. The note beside it read, "Welcome back, Architect Miller." No one ever found out who left it. But as Joyce took her first sip, she allowed herself a small, private smile. The kind that said the fight was over, and the real work had just begun. The worn floorboards creaked under Joyce's feet. As she stepped into her apartment, the weight of the day still humming in her bones. The envelope Damon had given her, thick with contracts, bonuses, and a keycard to the executive floor, sat heavy in her bag. But it was the small frayed sketchbook on her kitchen table that drew her eye. Flipping it open, she traced the wobbly lines of a stick-figure family standing beside a lopsided house. Lauren's last drawing. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps at the door, unexpected, insistent. Through the peephole, Joyce saw the young analyst from earlier, the one who'd spoken up for her. His name tag read Ethan Cole, and he was holding a bottle of champagne and a cardboard tube. I know, it's late," he stammered when she opened the door, "but I couldn't wait to show you this." He unrolled the contents of the 2 blueprints for the Boston project, already marked up with revisions, her revisions in crisp official ink. "They started implementing your changes before you even signed the contract," Ethan said, grinning. "The whole design team's working overtime. Even Sandra's pretending she always believed in you." Joyce's throat tightened. For 5 years, she'd been a ghost in her own life. Now, her hands, still rough from industrial cleaner, were holding proof she'd been seen. Ethan hesitated. "There's something else." He pulled out his phone, showing a news alert. Prescott Architects announces, groundbreaking hire janitor turned visionary to lead Boston landmark. The byline, Lauren Miller, the same reporter who'd once written a scathing piece about the firm's lack of diversity. Joyce's hands shook. A coincidence. It had to be. Then Ethan swiped to the next photo, a woman in a press badge, mid-30s, with Joyce's sharp cheekbones and her late daughter's smile. "Turns out your Lauren had a half-sister you never knew about. Her mom was your ex-partner's mistress. She's been trying to find you for years." The room tilted. Joyce gripped the edge of the table, the past and present colliding like storm fronts. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat at her window, watching Harlem wake up, and dialed the number Ethan had left, when a voice answered, warm, curious. "Alive?" Joyce whispered the only word that mattered, "Lauren." Silence, then a sob, "Mom." Outside, the sun rose over the city Joyce would now reshape. And for the first time since the accident, she let herself weep, not for what was lost, but for what had somehow impossibly been found. Joyce let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, her fingers resting lightly on her sketchbook. Then, with deliberate calm, she stood and walked to the front of the room. The architects shifted in their seats, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed resentment. "Before we begin," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "I want to show you something." She flipped open her sketchbook to reveal not just the flower-shaped building, but an entire portfolio of designs, each one more innovative than the last. There were vertical gardens that doubled as stormwater filters, modular housing units that could be assembled in hours, and a revolutionary carbon-negative high-rise. A senior architect named Richard Hale, the same man who'd once told her to stick to vacuuming, leaned forward, his face paling. "These are impossible. The materials alone don't exist." Joyce smiled. They do now. She tapped a page where a footnote read, "Patent pending." I've spent the last 5 years developing them, in my free time. The room erupted in murmurs. Damon silenced them with a raised hand. There's more. Joyce took a deep breath. The Boston Project isn't just another building. It's a memorial. She turned to a fresh page revealing a soaring glass atrium shaped like a blooming flower, its petals etched with thousands of tiny names. For every child lost to preventable accidents, for every dream cut short. Her voice didn't waver, and for Lauren, the silence that followed was deafening. Then came the twist. The conference room doors burst open, and in walked a woman with sharp eyes and a press badge, Lauren Miller, the reporter. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a group of construction workers in hard hats, their faces grim. One of them stepped forward, holding a rolled-up set of blueprints. Brian Bloom's latest innovation, Lauren said, her voice dripping with irony. She unfurled the plans, revealing a near-exact copy of Joyce's patented designs. Stolen. Again. Richard Hale shot to his feet. That's impossible. We vetted those. You vetted nothing, Lauren snapped. Because you never bothered to check who really designed them. She turned to Joyce, her expression softening. Mom, we've got him. The room exploded into chaos. Damon's voice cut through it like a blade. Enough. He turned to Joyce. This is your call. What do you want to do? Joyce looked at the stolen blueprints, then at the faces around her, some guilty, some shocked, some finally seeing her. She picked up a red marker and walked to the board. In bold capital letters she wrote, "No more silence." Then she turned to Lauren and smiled. Let's build something that lasts. As the room erupted into action, lawyers calling reporters, typing designers, scrambling to atone. Joyce stood at the center of it all. No longer a ghost, but a force. And this time, the world would remember her name. Joyce didn't move as Damon slid the folder across the table. The room held its breath, waiting for her reaction. Gratitude, triumph, maybe even tears. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a thick-bound document. Before I accept, she said, her voice steady as steel, there's something you all need to see. She dropped the file on the table with a thud that echoed through the silent room. The title page read, Structural Feasibility Analysis. Lauren Memorial Center, with her signature in bold at the bottom. Richard Hale, his hands shaking, flipped it open to reveal page after page of calculations, material stress tests, and wind tunnel simulations, all done by hand. This would take an entire engineering team months to complete, he stammered. I had time, Joyce said simply. While you were at cocktail parties, I was in the basement utility room running numbers. While you were taking 3-hour lunches, I was stress testing load-bearing equations with the janitor's supply closet as my lab. She pointed to a diagram. That impractical flower atrium. It's reinforced with a composite material I developed from recycled glass and construction waste. Stronger than steel, half the weight. The room went deathly quiet. Then came the sound no one expected: applause. From the doorway, the firm's oldest client, billionaire philanthropist Eleanor Whitmore, stood clapping slowly. I flew in when I heard the rumors, she said, walking toward Joyce. And now I see they didn't do you justice. She turned to Damon. My foundation will fully fund this project. On one condition: Joyce has complete creative control and she chooses her own team. Her sharp gaze swept the room. Even if that means replacing every single person here. Sandra's chair screeched as she stood up. You can't just— I believe I can— Eleanor interrupted, pulling a checkbook from her purse. Unless you'd like to explain to the press why your firm ignored an MIT-educated architect for 5 years while she mopped your floors, Joyce finally stood smoothing her blouse. "I'll take the job," she said, "but not like this." She walked to the whiteboard and wrote 2 words, "Open call. Tomorrow we hold public design submissions for the Boston project. No resumes, no names, just raw talent. Let's see who else this industry has been overlooking." Damon's grin could have powered the city. Sandra looked like she might be sick. As Joyce gathered her things, the junior analyst Ethan rushed forward. "The basement, all those cleaning supply boxes," Joyce winked. "Structural models. The mop water was perfect for testing water resistance." That night, as Joyce added the final touches to her open call flyer, her phone buzzed. A text from Lauren Front Page tomorrow. "From janitor to justice, how one woman is forcing architecture to face its blind spots." Joyce smiled, tucking Lauren's crayon drawing into her new briefcase. The war wasn't over, but for the first time in years she was finally armed. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Lauren Memorial Center buzzed with an energy Boston hadn't seen in decades. Reporters jostled for position as Joyce stepped up to the microphone, her team now 50 strong standing behind her in matching hard hats, stamped with a single flower logo. But just as she began to speak, a commotion erupted at the back of the crowd. Brian Bloom, her former partner, pushed his way forward, his custom suit straining at the shoulders. "This is a farce," he shouted, waving legal papers. "That design was mine first. I'll sue this firm into oblivion." The crowd gasped. Camera flashes exploded. Joyce didn't flinch. She simply nodded to Ethan, who tapped his tablet. The massive LED screen behind them flickered to life, showing security footage from 5 years prior. Brian, in Joyce's old office, stealing blueprints from her desk the night after Lauren's funeral. Then came the twist no one expected. The footage kept rolling, showing Brian handing those same plans to city officials, along with thick envelopes of cash. The crowd erupted. Brian lunged toward the stage, but Damon blocked him with a single outstretched arm. "I'd stay put if I were you," Damon said coolly. "The Attorney General's office has been waiting for this." As if on cue, 2 federal agents stepped through the crowd. Brian's face went slack with terror. Joyce finally approached the microphone, her voice carrying over the stunned silence. "Today isn't about revenge. It's about restoration." She gestured to the building, its flower-shaped atrium catching the morning light, its walls embedded with the names of thousands of lost children. "This is what happens when we stop overlooking people, when we start seeing potential instead of position." Then she turned to her team, the playground designer from Queens, now wearing a lead architect badge, the Haitian immigrant holding structural schematics, the Bronx teen grinning beside his first commissioned work. "Meet the future," Joyce said. "And it's just getting started." As the ribbon fell, the crowd surged forward, not just to tour the building, but to touch the engraved names, to feel the living walls, to witness what happens when talent finally gets its chance. And high above them all, in an office with north-facing windows, Joyce Miller sat at her desk, not cleaning it, not hiding behind it, but reshaping the world from it. On the wall behind her hung 2 things, Lauren's crayon drawing now framed in glass, and a simple mop head mounted like a trophy. Just so she'd never forget where she came from or how far she'd climbed. As Joyce turned her badge over to write those words, a small hand tugged at her sleeve. A wide-eyed girl no older than Lauren had been stood holding a crumpled drawing, a lopsided flower building with stick figures waving from its windows. "I drew this for you," she whispered. "My teacher says I can be an architect too now." Joyce knelt until they were eye level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lauren," the girl said, and the crowd collectively caught its breath. "After my grandma read about you in the paper, she told me to never let anyone tell me what I can't do." Joyce felt the weight of the moment settle in her chest like a stone. She took the drawing gently, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the white flower pin from her dress. "This belonged to another Lauren who believed in impossible things," she said, fastening it to the girl's shirt. "Now it's yours." The crowd erupted not in applause but in something deeper. A collective release of breath, of hope, of recognition. Then came the twist that would dominate headlines for weeks. From the back of the crowd, an older woman pushed forward, her face streaked with tears. Joyce froze. It was Margaret Bloom Bryan's mother. The woman reached into her purse and pulled out a yellowed envelope. "I found this in my son's safe," she said, her voice shaking. "It's the police report from the accident, the real one." Joyce's hands trembled as she opened it. The truth spilled out in stark, typewritten lines. Bryan had been drunk that night. The traffic light had been green. Lauren's death hadn't been an accident. It had been a crime. The silence that followed was heavier than any Joyce had ever known. Then Damon stepped forward, his voice cutting through the shock. "We have a justice system for this," he said, already dialing his phone. "And we have a building that stands for it." But Joyce was already moving. She took the little girl's hand and walked toward the memorial wall where thousands of names glittered in the sunlight. With a steady hand, she added one more Lauren Bloom. "The truth matters," she said to the crowd, "but so does what we build with it." As the first visitors streamed into the center, touching the living walls, marveling at the play of light through the flower-shaped atrium, Joyce stood at the entrance watching. Not as a janitor, not as an architect, but as a woman who had finally, after all these years, built something that couldn't be ignored. And somewhere in the laughter of children echoing through the halls, she swore she could hear her daughter's voice. "You did it, Mommy. You built us a home."